I am Farhana Yamin, and I'm a lawyer and an activist and a mother, and have been tirelessly involved in this very difficult, long drawn out process called COPS since 1991. So that's just a little bit about me. I can't believe we're starting on time. So a huge thank you to our previous panelists, who I was really happy to just carry on listening for a bit longer. And a lovely sort of segue from Atosa, talking about what are the new concepts of law? How can we enshrine a very different vision where nature is respected and nature has rights? And nature makes itself present in our legal systems. So yeah, this panel is 45 minutes long. I'm just checking that my fellow panelists are all here. They are. So thank you, Jojo. Thank you, Gidon. I haven't even introduced and asked if that's the correct way to pronounce your name. Thank you for that. Inga and Georgia, and we have apologies from Maya, who could not attend today due to her own personal circumstances. So I'm going to not take up all of the time that we have. I can see the brilliant people joining, and that we want to have as much discussion, as much dialogue, and as much free-flowing conversations in what for many of us may be the last hours before we get on a plane and go to Sharm el-Sheikh. At least I'm going first thing in the morning at 8 a.m. And I have to say, it's been one of the most difficult and challenging COPs that I've ever been to, and I've been to nearly all of them. And even at the last minute, we're battling with hotels and visas and logistics in a way that I've never ever done before. So apologies if I've been a little bit distracted, and apologies if I may turn to our brilliant panelists for their full mental presence, because mine is constantly being pinged. I'm constantly being pinged. Do I see Melanie here? That's also why I was slightly rambling, so I was thinking
she just sent a message actually to say that she may be a few minutes late, so she said please go ahead, and as long as she's not the first speaker, she will definitely be with us.
Okay, great. I think I did have her down as one of the earlier speakers, but why don't we do what I love, which is actually just take a moment. We're going to take maybe 90 seconds to just check in and just be with ourselves and with nature. And what I would do is just invite you literally to close your eyes and to think of your favorite place in nature, or a favorite memory. Just close your eyes and just think of that one place. Just that's what we can do. Thank you. So that was actually 1 minute and 8 seconds. And I bet for many of you, it may have felt like quite a long time, because we so rarely pause in our lives to connect and be. So in the next 30 seconds, I just want you to take 3 or 2 really deep breaths to just inhale and then exhale really deeply and from your belly, and let a sound emerge if it needs to really show that you're connecting with the breath of life. Thank you so much. Thank you. And if you're minded to, let's make the most of the chat function so that we can have a little bit more of an interaction, and maybe just say in one line or two lines, where was that place? What was that memory? What was that nature that you connected to? You know, you don't have to feel you have to write a big essay, but it's lovely to see people, you know, in their full selves and how they connect with nature. And we also now have Melanie here with us, which is good. Melanie, we just did a very brief check-in and took some deep breaths and slowed ourselves down to have this conversation. So that's what we were doing. And so I invite you to all, please go ahead and enter any words that come to you about what you're feeling towards nature right now. So I'm, as I said, introduced myself already. I'm going to do very, very short bios for everyone, and then ask them to introduce themselves, but more in the way of maybe briefly saying how they came to be here today. In a nutshell, their journeys, rather than all of their titles and their posts, which most of us know everything about each other at this point. So Inga is the executive director and the co-founder of Global Choices, both a UK and a USA-based not-for-profit. And she's going to be talking today about the Arctic, and also, you know, framed very much in terms of how we approach nature through the lens of systemic change, but also from the feminine side. Georgia Elliott-Smith is an engineer and a chartered environmentalist, and started her career in construction, and is a former UNESCO Special Junior Envoy for Youth and the Environment. And she's got loads of titles, but she'll also be talking about how individuals and communities can take legal action and take action and get results, and how citizens have been doing that with the support of conventions and frameworks. So welcome, Georgia. Gideon is our male representative, and he's the co-founder and director of EcoPeace Middle East, which is a regional organization. And I hope we see you, Gideon, maybe perhaps in Sharm or in the region. You know, the next COP also after this one will also be in the Middle East. And he's worked very hard with Jordanians, Palestinians, Israeli environmentalists to come together and support peace efforts in the Middle East, focusing on water. Jojo is a founder, as many of you know, along with a legal pioneer, the late Polly Higgins, who basically came up with the idea of having legislation, international and otherwise, to stop to have ecocide as a law, both at the international level and other levels, so that there is actual punishment, there is accountability from a criminal standpoint, which was missing. So welcome, Jojo. And I think Melanie is also joined us and has done a number of amazing things in the life that I've known, but she's currently she's currently leading Globe International, and is the chief executive from November 2015. Gosh, that's a long time. And she's done countless campaigns as a civil leader, and has an expertise in sustainability and human rights, and lives and works across the UK and India too, as well as many other countries. So welcome to you all. I think I've taken my share of the minutes. I'm absolutely passionate about law and using it as a tool but also from a place where I recognize that most of business as usual is held up by laws, and the very toxic and destructive cycle that we're now in, you know, is a result of legal principles and norms that were really bad for us, that we now realize that we have to undo, and undoing them involves dismantling large numbers of norms and rules and legislation that are very, very difficult, and somehow trying to do those all together as well in a coordinated way, and doing them on a time frame that science demands, that we deal with climate change and other ecological emergencies going on. That is what is so difficult. So I have no qualms that human beings have always worked together to dismantle toxic systems, to dismantle oppression, to end discrimination. They've done that very successfully. It's just taken sometimes decades or even hundreds of years. And that's the big challenge for us in the climate environment community right now, is that the planet is at that point where there are tipping points have already been triggered, and that there is massive ecological impact, which is impacting the lives of huge numbers of human beings. And this year of all years has shown that so vividly, from the country that I'm from Pakistan, you know, so starkly being underwater as a result of rapid rainfalls, and originally from glacial melts to wildfires, to 200 miles from where we're all going to meet in Sharm el-Sheikh. We will have one of the worst famines unfolding, you know, very nearby on our doorsteps. So huge numbers of impacts are here. And I feel that this is a lovely panel to begin looking at how law, litigation, legal frameworks, legislation can be upended, disrupted, new ones replaced with marvelous concepts, whether they're to conferring the rights of nature or holding, you know, now powerful actors to account. So let me just look at who I said would be starting in my notes. Or I think it was it Inga? Was it you, Inga, or Georgia? Sorry. Can you just remind me, because I've now got my notes on a device which just folded.
I have Malini in your notes.
Malini, and then Georgia, and then me.
Sorry, we reversed it, and then that's what it was. It was because you hadn't joined. So Malini, I was wondering if you could kick us off, introduce yourself, your journey. You've got 6 minutes to do that. So how you divide that, it is up to you. And I'll start my timer from when you speak. So please tell us a little bit about legislation, your work at Globe at the moment, but also the insights that you've gained throughout your journey for how law and peace, and ecological peace and peace with nature can really come about right now. Over to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Farhana. And it's always daunting going first, and I thought that I wouldn't make it in time because my son was banging away at his guitar and the washing machine was going and the internet was collapsing. But I'm here, so I'm just going to dive in. Greetings, everybody. It's fantastic to see so many familiar faces, and probably my oldest co-conspirator on this call, which is Gidon. And we go back more than 25 years when Gidon and EcoPeace Middle East joined Friends of the Earth International. Long story, but start with a couple of things about myself, where the intersection between peace and law comes for me personally. So I'll start with my personal biography, which is very relevant. So my family comes from two parts of the subcontinent in India, which were partitioned, Punjab and Bengal. And the history of my family was that they were very much involved in the freedom struggle, but also in the creation of the laws, the Constitution of India. And my great uncle was the private secretary of Mahatma Gandhi. And so there was a huge, at that time, you could imagine the turn of the century, there was a great deal of enthusiasm and passion and confidence about creating your own laws, your own legal frameworks, your own constitution as newly created entities. The reality of it is that even though we had created this incredible framework, the Constitution of India, which is one of the most sophisticated, the longest certainly in the world, the most inclusive process, that there are problems. So beginning with that journey, I have always worked on, in my region, intercommunal, interfaith harmony. And Gidon has been involved in one of these, which was more than 10 years ago, actually at the time of the first calamity to befall Pakistan, which was the 2010 floods, where we launched an Indo-Pak initiative to promote climate cooperation, to promote cooperation on water, which is an issue which has become securitized in our part of the world, and to promote cooperation on disaster risk management. It's been a long journey, and it's been absolutely devastating to see the same mistakes made again in this year as they were in 2010, and the things that we were trying to prevent by having institutions work much more effectively. In terms of the 3 points that I want to make, which are relevant for this discussion, it is as follows. Number one, making laws is essential, but it's not enough. Number two, enforcement really matters. And number three, access to justice matters the most. So if we look at climate, going back to 2014, and Global was created in 1992 to enable parliamentarians to engage with the UN system of the Rio Summit. At that time, and actually at Kyoto, which I was at, leading the Friends of the Earth International campaign, in 1997, there were around 52 laws and policies, climate laws and policies in the world. At this point, so all these years, we've got COP27 and Kyoto was COP3, all these years, you know, in the interim, we have created an amazing international architecture of climate change laws and policies. And at the latest count, it was just under 2,934. Alongside that, in recent years, has been this upsurge in climate litigation. And we have almost an equivalent number of lawsuits around the world. So we've got the frameworks in place, but why is it that countries don't implement their own laws? So a second point is about the enforcement of laws. And one of the most powerful cases that I know of personally is not the Orgenda case. It's not all of the cases that are known about in, you know, in the Western parts of the world, but it is the Leghari case in Pakistan. And the Leghari case was so extremely important because it was ruled on by Justice Syed Mansoor Ali Shah in the Lahore court, High Court, and brought by a farmer named Leghari. And it was brought in 2015, and he said, we have a climate change framework act in Pakistan, and yet I find that I am continuing to be at the mercy of the elements. And this framework and these laws and these policies are of no benefit to me. So he went to the courts, and the Justice Mansoor Ali Shah took on his case, and rapidly, within a period of 3 to 4 months, he created the judgment. And the judgment that he created was that the Pakistan government, every single department at the national and at the province level, had to account for why they had failed to enact the legislation. And as a result of that, the legislation and the policies and frameworks in place. And as a result of this judge's judgment came a number of sweeping changes focused on the training of officials, the awareness raising of lawmakers. If that enforcement will not work. My final point, with my 1 minute to go, is about access to justice, where we effectively abandon people. Because most people don't have Klein Earth's reserves of £26 million. Most people have no money, and most people, even if you look in this country, two-thirds of people in the UK don't know about their right to how to access legal institutions. They rely on very expensive lawyers. So we have to lower the barrier to entry for access to justice. We've got a couple of very powerful conventions to help us do that. The Escazú Convention, which comes from Rio, and which, Georgia, I know that you've been working to implement and enforce. And of course, more recently, the Escazú Convention, which enables access to justice, public participation, right to information, to enable citizens to act on the rights that we have. But my close on that, and look forward to what else you've got to say. Thank you, Farhana.
Thank you so much, Malini, and thank you for keeping to time. That's always hard to do as a first speaker, and I know that you were expecting maybe a reverse order, so thank you for joining us. And I also had to switch off my washing machine, which was also bipping, and yeah, yesterday the boiler broke, then we had a flood, so all of these personal things are you know, as mothers, we're undeterred from doing also our work. And what a brilliant segue as well. Enactment, enforcement, access to citizens. So maybe Georgia, you can just pick up the baton.
Yes, yeah. Thank you so much. Yeah. So it's wonderful to hear what you had to say. My name is Georgia Elliott-Smith. I am a citizen. I have no background in law at all. I am actually an environmental engineer, been working, as Farhana said at the beginning, been working in the construction sector for over 20 years. In my work, I had a lot of involvement in waste management and had become incredibly frustrated over the course of my career to see the vast quantities of waste that we were creating and the fact that there was no financial penalty for that. In fact, seeing everywhere that the polluter does not pay, the polluter profits, and actually it's society that pays. And so becoming increasingly frustrated about that. In 2018, what I realized, though, I had a sort of awakening, having been an environmental professional, as I say, for over 20 years. When the IPCC report came out, stating that we had 12 years until these catastrophic tipping points, which we obviously now know was quite conservative, and a number of those we have already reached. When the David Attenborough documentaries were on the TV in the UK here, showing us, you know, the harms that we had created and the species that were going extinct from our actions, I had really a kind of breakdown where I just dropped into enormous grief and realized that as a professional, I had been complicit in this, and that even though I had felt that we'd been doing some good, it was nowhere near enough, and I'd been kidding myself and living in denial. And so it was at that sort of time that Extinction Rebellion came to prominence, and I took to the streets in grief, not really knowing what else to do. And I found there a freedom and a sort of shared grief of normal people just desperately trying to do something. And that started my journey as an activist. And I now hold businesses to account. I also help businesses to do more. But what I was doing locally, we had an incinerator that was in where I live in North London, in one of the most deprived, racially diverse communities, health deprived, economically deprived communities in the UK. There was a waste incinerator, which instead of decommissioning, they were rebuilding and expanding. And I thought this was an absolute travesty. And so along with a couple of campaigning groups, I've been campaigning against this for a couple of years. But what I came to realize through meeting incredible, passionate people who were giving so much of their time was that those incinerator operators were not really doing anything wrong according to the law of the land. They were simply following the government policy and strategies and procedures. And so I realized, with my background, with my network professionally, with my education, essentially with my privilege, there was more that I could do than just sit in the streets. And so I started talking to lawyers and realized what I had not known before, which was that individuals can take the government to court under what Melina was talking about, the Aarhus Convention, and with financial protections. And so I started a fundraising campaign to take the UK government to court over failure to price carbon emissions. And carbon emissions are one of the huge problems of waste incineration, as well as other pollution. So we took the government to court. So cut a very long story short, I engaged a legal team. I crowdfunded all of the money. I'm not a wealthy person. I didn't have the money, as we've talked about before. I didn't have the money to engage a big legal team. But I met some wonderful lawyers who were working, who set a budget for me for crowdfunding, and I had some incredible experiences of fundraising, great friends I've made from that process. To cut it short, we didn't win the case. It was dismissed in the end. We went to the High Court, we went to the Court of Appeal. The judge decided that it was within the government's discretion about what industries they would include. However, what I learned from taking legal action is that it is important to do it anyway, because that case set a new precedent. And that precedent was that the judge said that the government must take into account the Paris Agreement in the immediate, in the short term, not just kick the can down the road until 2035 or 2050, which is what they had been doing. And so now all of the new policies coming out from government, there is a legal precedent there, which other cases are now using to bring, you know, further action against the government. And, you know, my legal team were involved recently in the successful case against the government on challenging the net zero strategy, which they said is not sufficient to achieve net zero. You know, and that started by an individual claimant, supported by a legal team and supported by crowdfunding. But that is just such an amazing, empowering thing for individuals to do. Don't get me wrong, it is also, you know, stressful and time consuming and everything. So you do also have to have the privilege of networks and, you know, a family who can support your time spent away from home. People are doing this all over the world. I'll wrap up on that. Thank you, Farhana. But yeah, I look forward to discussing it further. Thank you.
Oh, what a powerful story. And as governments fail even more, it's even more relevant that ordinary people can challenge quickly, immediately, and self-organizing to do that. So I think that's a really, really powerful example and a precedent that you've set. Okay, Inga, over to you. I realize it's hard timekeeping and listening to such brilliant speakers. So I'm doing my best. So I'll start interrupting you at 5 minutes, or waving, or giving an emoji that says you're late.
So there we go. That's better. I'm not. I mean, you'd think you'd figured out the muting bit after 2 years of lockdown. Well, it's just a huge privilege to be here and to be amongst such wonderful people. And it's just been a terrific day. I'm sure everyone would agree. So, you know, what I've seen of the day, it has really demonstrated the power of feminine energy and elevated the possible. And the art of the possible is what I want to really talk about today. And Georgia's already just illustrated exactly the art of the possible. Just a little bit about me. I essentially, as we co-founded Global Choices, we wanted to be sure that we were doing something different. And I guess we could be described as an all-female team of policy entrepreneurs. We're trying to set precedents for future fit governance. And using models, the best way of doing that is to model it, just as Georgia's just modeled her involvement in what she created. We're using the Central Arctic Ocean ice, which is an area beyond national jurisdiction, and reframing it as a global commons. Because we feel we have to see these as the ecosystem services that they provide, and we have to understand these systems in a much broader way. And so we're doing it in an inclusive way. We're also empowering young women climate leaders. We call them our Arctic Angels. We now have 53 of them in 33 countries, and some of them you heard earlier, and it was very powerful to hear their voices and their poetry from Kenya and India, and just terrific. So the art of the possible. I have a stick on my fridge. Yeah, I'm one of those who still hasn't got the minimalist kitchen vibe. And it says, shoot for the moon, because even if you fail, you land amongst the stars. And I think that's really the essence of the challenge we're facing now. I mean, we know we are in unprecedented times, and we have to chart new paths. And that's why we are called Global Choices, because of the choices that we make now are so critical. And I think when it comes to the legal side, all too long sort of legal issues have been on a par with like nuclear physics. It's far too complicated and best left to the experts, and therefore doesn't get the attention it deserves, really, in being such a powerful tool for fighting climate change. And I think, you know, George has just illustrated that these global commons really belong to us all as global citizens, and therefore we deserve a voice. And for those who don't have voices, we are, as you say, the privileged. And we are now, just as an aside, on the back of our business cards, everyone is allowed to choose what they say. And one of our staff chose to say, those who have the privilege to know have the responsibility to act. And I do feel that very strongly. We all feel that very strongly as a team, that we really want to see more just and inclusive social and environmental outcomes from the laws that are being made. And for sure, that isn't necessarily happening. So it does need expertise, but it also needs to keep pace with what is unfolding. Timing, it takes so long. I mean, the BBNJ is still not over the line. And, is it going to be future fit? Big question mark. And, legal change tends to settle at the lowest common aspiration rather than the highest. And all too often these laws are made with corporate or national interests at their heart. And they are really inclusive. We need to bring these voices in. We also need to bring in the voices of rights of nature. And I'm sure that, when we look back, I mean, I was very close to the Paris process, and I worked closely then with Mary Robinson. And when you saw how strong the feminine was in that with Christiana, and bringing every committee had to have 50-50, and it came to fruition in much better outcomes. So we seem to have gone backwards since then, and I absolutely support the campaign to get more women into COP and in decision making. The precedent setting that is happening has already been mentioned, and I do bow to my fellow panelists. EcoSci, Client Earth, they're finding these pathways that we can leverage and lean on, and we certainly are leaning on some of your wins in these litigation. But taking the system lens is because we need to understand the Arctic as an apex system, and we need to understand climate causality. And here is a system that is going extinct under our watch, with dramatic cascading consequences for peace and security. We are potentially looking at 60 million climate refugees. And if you think of the instability that, the current war and Syria has created, it's huge suffering, and invariably women and children bear the brunt of that. So that's why we've settled on the Arctic as a model, because we can't plant ice. And once it's gone, it's pretty much irrecoverable in our lifetime. So seeing this as a global commons, we need to lift our eyes and understand it as a global commons. And Sami community, of course, will be hugely affected, but Samoans will be underwater. So their voices need to be brought in. And so that's that lens that we're trying to bring in. And I do believe this is the feminine lens that sees the whole and that is willing to set self-interest aside for the common good.
Thank you so much, Inga. I think I'm going to have to ask you to wrap up so that we do have time for the last two speakers. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Just one last comment. I want to quote Robert Swan, that the biggest risk is the belief that someone else will fix it. And there is no other. We are one humanity. And I think this is what this day has demonstrated so strongly. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. Absolutely. And absolutely that there are these critical systems that we're now seeing being very stressed, or as we saw in India and Pakistan, the monsoon, and really huge systems of that are involved in the climatic system are collapsing or changing so suddenly, affecting millions of people. So Gideon, over to you, as you're in a region which has always had water as a source of life, but also as a source of dispute. So over to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
I'll start waving furiously after 5 minutes, because we really do need to give Jojo her time and also have a little bit of time for questions as well.
So thank you so much for this great honor to be on such a distinguished panel. So my journey actually starts as a law student at American University in DC. I'm doing a master's in international environmental law at the time when the peace negotiations between Israel and Jordan moved forward, and negotiations between Israel and the PLO for an interim agreement. And I'm worried and concerned that peace between people, which we, of course, were so excited and supportive of, was ignoring environmental concerns. And before leaving Washington, and as the basis of my thesis, I was able to raise some funds with the idea that as Israelis, Palestinians, Jordanians, and Egyptians, we need to be working together to make sure that peace doesn't just result in peace between people, but in sustainability, that we're taking care of the very precarious and scarce, particularly water resources that we have in our region, such as the River Jordan, which through conflict, we managed to turn, we the Abrahamic people, Jews, Christians, and Muslims in our own countries, turned it into little more than a sewage canal, which is what it is today. And that was what led to the creation of EcoPeace 28 years ago. I've been the Israeli co-director ever since. We've always, our model, I think, like the call for co-chairs for the climate COP, we've always had co-chairs, Palestinian, Jordanian, Israeli, formerly also Egyptian, unfortunately not now. But we were all men back in 1994 when the organization was created. Today, we're in fact a majority female, a majority women co-director. So my Palestinian co-director, Nada and Majdalani, my Jordanian co-director, Yana Abu Taleb. And I can tell you that the change that has taken place over these nearly 3 decades to make sure that there is women leadership, that there is a gender understanding of the importance of working on our issues has been instrumental, because the courage that has really helped EcoPeace transform itself has much been led by the gender balance, moving from an all male to a mixed, a far more representative, reflecting our populations and our region, which is at least 51% female. EcoPeace has had to reinvent itself because peace has clearly never broken out. And we quickly understood that the environment is actually an issue of common concern that can help bring peace. And we didn't know it, but we've been instrumental in helping to develop the whole concept of environmental peace building, utilizing that common concern. And sadly, as peace has really become almost a dirty word in our part of the world, where people have lost hope, we've reinvented ourselves again in these last 5-6 years, understanding that the climate crisis brings real urgency. And while peace has really lost any sense of urgency, the climate crisis requires cooperation, requires Israelis and Palestinians and Jordanians to work together. Otherwise, we're going to see a repeat of what happened in Syria, clearly not only taking place because of the climate crisis, but the water scarcity contributing to the uprising. So, in our part of the world, thankfully, all of our governments recognize that the climate crisis is real, while the rest of the world is so fearful, quite rightly, of a 1.5-degree increase in temperatures. Here in the Middle East, on the Eastern Mediterranean, the temperature of the Mediterranean was 2% higher this summer than ever recorded. We're already experiencing over a 1.5-degree increase in temperatures, and the opposite of what you've experienced in Pakistan. We've had 15 years of drought in these last 20 years. So the climate crisis is introducing urgency into protracted conflicts. And I think that's the message that I'd like to bring, is that in areas of protracted conflict where people have lost real hope that we'll ever see peace, the climate crisis introduces urgency. That's what Nada, Yana, and myself bring to the table, a far more balanced leadership of women and men, of Palestinians, Jordanians, and Israelis, now working for 30 years almost together to bring this change forward and to utilize the climate crisis not only as a threat multiplier, but perhaps as one of the only opportunities that we have to try to knock the heads of our leadership, of our governments together in a desperate wake-up call that if we don't change policies, if we don't work together to commit to particularly on water scarcity issues, to work together. And we've seen progress, this is my last comment, seeing a deal struck, an agreement between Jordanians and Israelis on a water energy nexus, working together at the moment on a Palestine-Israel deal on creating a water energy nexus, mostly to provide the desperately needed water for Gaza. Thank you very much.
So much, and thank you for doing all that amazing work in the probably one of the most difficult geographies, and tirelessly doing that work. And passing over to Jojo, who will have your 6 minutes, I think, before we're kicked out or kicked off. Thank you so much. Thank you all of my panelists.
No, thank you, Farhana. I'm just going to dive straight into my key focus, which is on international criminal law. So the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court addresses the crimes which most threaten the peace, security, and well-being of the world. So genocide, crimes against humanity, war crimes, and the crime of aggression. And of course, it's clear now that mass damage and destruction of our vital ecosystems through human activity is now constituting exactly such a threat. And although such acts can often be a cause, a feature, or a result of conflict, it's also clear that they're not restricted to times of conflict. And they don't necessarily involve direct harm to humans. So they're not actually best addressed by the existing Rome Statute crimes. And at the same time, this damage and destruction, which is now increasingly referred to as ecocide, it doesn't only have devastating consequences for communities and nations already now, but also horrific implications for the future of human civilization as a whole, as well as the wider community of species that we share this planet with. And we have, in effect, therefore, been waging war on nature. So ecocide is also a crime against peace in that sense. And so we can see the strong relevance of including it into the Rome Statute. And this initiative is now being discussed by a growing number of states parties to the statute, at least 25 at last count, and climbing, as well as by the court itself. So I'll just briefly outline some of the effects that we believe that bringing this law into the international list of crimes will have. Firstly, of course, it creates a new preventive rule that applies across many jurisdictions, important as the worst polluters are often transnational corporations. It acts as a strong complement to and a protection for the newly acknowledged human right to a clean and healthy environment. And secondly, and this is really interesting, the adoption process takes a little time. Now, that means that there's a period where the law isn't yet in place, but it can be seen approaching. And this window of time is a strategic window for change, or compliance, if you like. The existence of a consensus legal definition of ecocide, which emerged last year from an independent panel of 12 top lawyers from around the world that was convened by our foundation. That definition provides all sectors with a useful lens through which they can examine their practices, their supply chains, and that is an exercise which stimulates asking the right questions. And this is the first step to provoking development of new and less damaging approaches and to galvanizing positive behavioral change. And it also has the linked effect, of course, of leveling the playing field for those who are already leading in the sustainability arena. And the inclusion of ecocide law as a key driver and influencer of change in the recent Pivot Point report from the UN Race to Zero initiative is a clear acknowledgement of exactly this. And thirdly, as ecocidal activities often take place in the global south or in poorer communities, while the operative decisions are taken in the wealthy north, this law presents a useful tool for addressing climate and environmental justice as it is aimed at individuals, key decision makers in positions of superior responsibility. Likewise, it supports environmental defenders working to protect ancestral lands and vital planetary ecosystems, because they are commonly treated as criminal disruptors of legitimate business. However, when the business practice itself has the question mark over it, from a framing perspective, the tables are completely turned. Those defenders now become the moral upholders of the law. And last but not least, the recognition of the worst harms as ecocide will help to support the enforcement of the existing body of criminal law and civil regulation around the environment, which, as we know, is incredibly poorly enforced, as was covered a little bit earlier. It will help provide the enabling conditions for the fulfillment of multilateral environmental agreements, which at present are creating frustratingly little by way of action, as there is just nothing strong enough in place to prevent business as usual from continuing in a very poorly enforced regulatory landscape. So we have a very small window of opportunity to change the way the overall game is played. And we don't think there are very many solutions out there with the power to do it, but we do think that ecocide law has the possibility of taking a good shot at that. So I'll leave it there, so we've got a bit of room for questions.
Oh, thank you, because you had actually a minute and a half left. So that's really, really helpful. And I have to say, on a personal level, as part of my journey, I got really frustrated after COP24, and which was in Poland, by the way, one of the many COPs that we've had in a coal-dependent rich country. And I see that also as part of a pattern that we're having increased numbers of COP only in countries that can really afford it, and only in countries where there's such a significant say and a sway. So this is one of the things we also have to challenge at the same time as challenging gender injustice, is simply economic injustice that allows, you know, privilege and access, and for smaller countries to not host them, or most vulnerable countries to not host them. So thank you, Jojo. And my personal journey, as I was saying, was at the end of COP24 to have joined Extinction Rebellion as part of my own vow to get laws moving, including the law of ecocide. So you've made an incredible difference. And I hope and I pray Polly is watching and supporting us from wherever she is. So thank you for your work. So we do have, thank you to our lovely, wonderful organizers. And there's about 55 of you. So if you have questions, please put them in the chat. And we have time for questions. I've got lots of questions as well, but if you please put up your hand, please, you know, the floor is yours really to ask each other questions, to have this as a little bit of more of an interactive session. And while we let the audience just do that, please can you, well, our fellow participants really, oh yeah, that's your timer, you see, Jojo, so you did really well. So if you wanted to come back, that would be
I just talk really fast.
I think, look, one thing I would sort of say is, what is your ask? For me, my question is, what is your ask of each other here, not just as a panelist, of the 55 people? What is the one takeaway that you want everyone to go away with today? So maybe I'll start with you, Jojo, at the end, and see who else is itching at the, you know, itching to take the floor.
Yeah, I'm really happy to take that. And absolutely, it's about, I mean, for us, it's about conversation. It's about, you know, getting the word out around the possibility of an ecocide law. And what started off as an accidental strategy has actually ended up as a very deliberate approach that we take, which is that we don't just focus on politics and law. We actually talk to everybody about this, because what we realize is that the broader the conversation is, the more it floats to the top. And I say that in the words of Inga Anderson of UNEP, who basically said she'd watched this word ecocide kind of float to the top, and now it's, you know, popping up at the UN level in many, many different arenas. So, you know, we all have networks, you know, let's use them. And of course, do visit the website. There's a huge Act Now menu for everyone and all different walks of life that could potentially be taken up. There's always something that can be done. But certainly, the more the word is used, the more the politicians are coming to us saying, oh, tell us about this. What's happening?
Brilliant. I think you have sort of answered the question, what level of support are you anticipating for creating a crime of ecocide? So maybe that's more specific about creating the crime at the International Criminal Court.
Yeah, we're already beginning to bring together and sort of facilitate the coming together of a small group of cross-regional group of states that are interested in moving this forward. And actually, we had our first head of state in the UN General Assembly just in September recently, actually calling on the states in the UN to get behind the group that are proposing to do this. So yeah, it's
excellent.
It's really moving.
It really is. I mean, it's like only 3 or 4 years old in the public domain. It took a lot longer, obviously, to conceptualize and have it at that point. And it really only did that because social movements took it forward, which is also a fantastic example that, you know, people use law. It's not just NGOs that create solutions. Ordinary people create momentum and change and decide how they want to take things forward. I think I saw Georgia's hand up first, and then Gideon's. So over to you, Georgia.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I do have an ask, which is about protest and about maintaining rights for protest and you know, being vigilant, because I rely for my legal action on, you know, our governments following things like the Aarhus Convention, but recently those have been called into question by the government. And actually we have had bills here to limit our right to protest, to limit our ability to speak out, and also to limit our ability to take these kind of legal actions that we do rely on to shift the dial. And I think it is so important that we promote, share, and sort of normalize and make protest an aspirational thing, rather than something that is other than me, you know, and something dirty and niche. But actually we all engage with, applaud, support, and amplify protest, because it is so important, I think, particularly in the culture we find ourselves in with media and social media, that we really are vigilant about our rights, and that we support those people's rights to protest, no matter what their cause is. The right to protest is so important, and it must be upheld.
Thank you for that. And Gideon, and then Melanie.
Actually, Melanie was before me in putting
okay,
up.
sorry.
Melanie, go ahead.
Okay, thanks, Gideon. Okay, so I want to come back to the point that I had made, which was really about, it's fantastic that we have laws in place. And Jojo, you and I have had this conversation a few times. You're looking for ecocide to create new legislation at the macro level, and you hope that it will then be applied at the national level. My point is this: we have amazing laws in the world. De jure, we are fantastic. De facto, we suck. Why do we suck? Because at the same time as we acknowledge the wonderfulness of our legal frameworks, and I as an Indian can tell you, nothing can surpass the wonderfulness of the Constitution of India in terms of the rights that it grants us. We can't exercise those rights because our legal institutions are completely threadbare. And our access to justice is next to zero. So other than these really well-funded organizations like Klein Earth, other than organizations like the Access to Justice Foundation in the UK, which make it possible, please remember, there are 14 million people in the United Kingdom who live in poverty. 2/3 of the UK population does not know how to access legal advice. So for these people, what do they do if they want to become a Georgia? It's not about going in crowdfunding. We need the investment in our legal institutions. In the United Kingdom, the mother of parliaments, the mother of rule of law in the world, we have a court system which has collapsed. That's the reality. So unless there is an equal enthusiasm for doing the dirty work of making sure that we have legal aid now in the UK is £950 million less than it was in 2010. If you want to do the right thing, it can't be done by Klein Earth bankrolling high-profile cases around the world and opening up offices in Beijing. You need to make sure that you are empowering people to exercise their laws and investing in their institutions in their country. Sorry, my daughter's just come home.
I couldn't agree with you more. It's not about just the cases. It's about the very conditions for citizens to have access to justice. Those are being dismantled, the right to protest, the right to free speech, you know, from journalism to human rights to legal aid. Those have been eroded so much, and the right to protest has almost gone. So thank you for highlighting that. And I too agree with you that sometimes one of the reasons I'm working in foundations is, you know, there was a bottlenecks created and darlings created, as we know happen in the funding world, and actually it's time to decentralize and shift resources in a more distributed system and a more even system to allow people to take action where they want to and how they want to. Gideon, over to you. And I think for the final words, because we do have to wrap up a little bit before the next panel, and I have to book some hotel rooms for people whose rooms just got cancelled in Sharm. So
Wow.
you.
So I would like to, you know, sort of highlight the importance of linking, of how can we really institutionally advance the climate crisis and peace building. And one of the problems of the whole UN process is that, you know, absolutely rightly, the climate crisis is global, but it's each country that's reporting on a national level. But the climate crisis doesn't just hit one country. The climate crisis hits a region in a particular way. The UN process needs to help advance a regional response that is not looking at every country reporting on its own, almost ignoring the fact that it's interdependent with its neighbors. If we can institutionalize also a regional response to the climate crisis with each region. So look at the example of Europe with its European Green Deal. That's really what inspired Ecopeace in calling for a green-blue deal for the Middle East, because that's the only way that we're going to survive the climate crisis. We need, of course, this global effort, but equally we need the regional approach. And by taking the regional approach, that's the linkage of meeting the climate crisis, but also helping build trust, helping build peace in our troubled parts across this planet.
Thank you so much, Gideon. Thank you. And in fact, the very first thing and very first march I personally actively joined was the Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament back in the 70s. And, we have got to go back to that now, because now we're seeing, it was not a peaceful world. We kidded ourselves. We pretended something and pretended to imagine that we were living in a peaceful world when we were in fact not. So the more new peace builders there are, the better. I think I would like to end the panel here by saying a huge thank you to these amazing people, with apologies, I know, from another panelist, Maya, who couldn't be with us, and to say a huge thank you to the She Changes climate team. I'm sorry I didn't get my background as I should have in the downloaded and installed for a virtual Zoom background, but there's just a long way to go in fighting systemic injustices. And what is magical and amazing and keeps me going every day is that our movements are now really, really integrating, becoming more intersectional, becoming more ferocious, and being more joined up in their asks. Of course, it's still uneven. Of course, there's a long way to go. But I think I've never seen so much energy joined up and directed against the right targets at the right time. And no matter what the diversity of tactics and strategies and forums, we are there. We are all there together. So I hope to see many of you in COP. And for those of you who are not coming to COP, good decision, and carry on supporting us and amplifying and linking up all the sources of injustice, but especially gender injustice, because if that one doesn't go, heaven help us. We've been doing this for hundreds of years. We've really got to tackle and get parity, get equality, get also equality on the terms that really matter to ordinary people and those without power. So that's what motivates and animates me. And finally, I just did a little tiny blurb of, sorry, chairman's, privilege, chairperson's privilege. So I'm going to, we've set up something called Culture COP. And the idea is really to create very different sorts of spaces, to create trust, to create love, to create understanding, to create long-lasting change, and to use arts, culture, and heritage as tools, as places where we can imagine and co-create our different world together. And we'll also be doing a pilgrimage to Mount Sinai, where the three great religions of the world, the moral codes of our world was sent down, on that mountain. And that's where I think we should go and invent the new moral codes that we want to live by and birth them into being. So I hope some of you can join us for that, but we'll also report online and back to you. So back to you, Elise, and back to the She Changes climate team. And yeah, thank you so much for joining. It's amazing that 64 people have come back. So thank you. Thank you, panelists.